Hello, students, welcome back. It's wonderful to see you advance to your third semester of study. Well, I'm happy to be back in your group. I would have been happier if this were a live class, and I would have been happiest if we were back in college. Well, you would have noticed that as I just spoke to you, I used three sentences with three different forms of the word happy. What I did as I spoke was use the different degrees of comparison of the word happy. So that is going to be our first unit in grammar, the section called degrees of comparison. So the phrase degrees of comparison refers to the use of the positive, comparative, and superlative forms of an adjective or an adverb. Adjectives and adverbs, as you know, are qualifying words. An adjective normally qualifies a noun. For example, a yellow flower, a big book, a tall building. The words yellow, big, and tall qualify the nouns that they are attached to. In a similar manner, an adverb is a qualifying word which normally qualifies a verb, sometimes an adjective, and sometimes another adverb. Uh, for example, you may say, uh, the lion runs very fast. Fast is an adverb that qualifies the verb runs. So, depending on the number of nouns used, the number of things that are spoken about, you may use different degrees of comparison. So, when adverbs or adjectives are used to compare, depending on the numbers, they change the form or sometimes they add new words to indicate the degrees of the quality. We'll explain it further. Let us begin with an example from your subject, literature. You're all familiar with Shakespeare and probably also familiar with the names of some of his well known plays. King Lear is one of his best known works. Apart from the many other qualities, this play is also remarkable for its length. It has about 3,500 lines, and therefore you may say that King Lear is a long play. The word long is an adjective that describes the noun play. So, when we spoke about King Lear alone, it was enough to call it a long play. But when we compare it with another play, for example, Othello, which has more than 3,600 or around 3,600 lines, we could construct a sentence indicating a comparison in this way. Othello is longer than King Lear. We notice that the word or the adjective long now becomes longer because two nouns are being compared, King Lear and Othello, the two plays. When the comparison involves more than two units, then we need to use the superlative degree of comparison. So, when we talk about a play like Hamlet, for example, which is longer than King Lear and Othello, and in fact is the longest play written by Shakespeare, we frame the sentence in this way: Hamlet is the longest play. We have used the superlative form of the word or the adjective long. So, long when it is one play, longer when we compare two plays, and longest when we are talking about more than two plays. So, the three degrees of comparison are the positive, the comparative, and the superlative. The positive degree of an adjective is the adjective in its simple or basic form. We use it when we speak about one noun and no comparison is being made. The comparative degree of an adjective denotes a higher degree of the quality than the positive. And we use the comparative degree when two things or two objects or two people are compared. The superlative degree of an adjective denotes the highest degree of that particular quality, and it is used when more than two things or many things are being compared. So, when we speak about only one person or thing, we use the positive degree. For example, the adjective big in the sentence, this is a big building. When we compare two persons or two things with each other, we use the comparative degree. For example, the word big, the adjective big becomes bigger when we use it in a sentence like this. This building is bigger than that one. So, when we compare more than two people or things or objects, then we use the superlative degree. As for instance, in this sentence, this is the biggest building in this street. Now, the same sentence can be written using the positive degree or the comparative degree without change in meaning. For example, we may say, this building is bigger than any other building in the street. The meaning remains the same. So, also, when we say, no other building in the street is as big as this one, the meaning does not change. You will notice that we have written three sentences which have used three different forms of the adjective big, big, bigger, and biggest, but the meaning does not change. Well, that is a topic that we will be discussing later. For the moment, you need to understand that when more than two things or units are being compared, we use the superlative degree of comparison. So we'll now take a look at the ways in which the adjectives and adverbs change when the degrees of comparison change. But let's remind ourselves that the degrees of comparison are applicable only to adjectives and adverbs. They do not apply to nouns or verbs or pronouns or any other part of speech. It is only to adjectives and adverbs. In other words, the qualifying words. They are the ones that indicate a quality. So it is a quality that is being compared. That is why it's only adjectives and adverbs that change when we speak about the different degrees of comparison. Most of the adjectives form their comparative and superlative forms with the addition of the inflection or the suffix er and est. For example, we've already seen in the earlier slides the use of words like big and long. So, big is the positive degree of comparison. When it is used to compare two units, we use the word bigger. You will notice how the spelling changes. It takes one more of the last consonant sound and then the inflection er, the suffix er. Big becomes bigger in the comparative degree, and in the superlative degree, it becomes biggest, biggest, doubling of the last consonant plus est. And the superlative form always takes the uh, the article the, the definite article the. So tall becomes taller and tallest, long, longer, longest, short, shorter, shortest, simple, simpler, simplest. You would notice that each one of these examples uh, has one syllable only. So the rule is that when we change the degrees of comparison of adjectives that have only one syllable, they normally take the er and est as the suffix in the comparative and superlative degrees, respectively. If, however, the adjectives have more than two syllables, for example, a word like useful, this is a useful tip. Useful is the adjective that describes or qualifies the noun tip. So, useful, it has two syllables, unlike the earlier adjectives that we discussed. Big, it has only one vowel sound and therefore one syllable. Useful, effective, different, honest, qualified, beautiful, intelligent, interesting. All these are adjectives which have two or more syllables. The number of vowel sounds determines the number of syllables in a word. A word like beautiful, for example, has three syllables. Beautiful. So, uh, adjectives that have more than two syllables do not normally take the inflection e or the suffix er and est, especially adjectives which have more than two syllables and those which end in ful, ent, est, and so on. They take the words more and most or less and least to indicate the different degrees of comparison. So, this is a beautiful flower. This flower is more beautiful than the other one. This is the most beautiful flower. You do not say beautiful, beautifuler, beautifulest. You say beautiful, more beautiful, and most beautiful. So also intelligent, interesting. This is an interesting movie. That movie is more interesting than this one. This movie is the most interesting movie I have ever seen. So, interesting also as an adjective that has more than two syllables takes more and most. Now, suppose you're talking about something that, the quality that is diminishing. For example, this is an interesting book that is less interesting than this one. This is the least interesting book that I have ever read. So, interesting, less interesting, and least interesting. Qualified, more qualified, most qualified. Qualified, less qualified, least qualified. However, even in adjectives that have more than two syllables, but if they end in words like er or y or ly, they can take the comparative and superlative forms. They can form the comparative and superlative degrees with the addition of the suffixes er and est. Look at the examples. Clever. It has two syllables, clear and v. There are two vowel sounds. It has two syllables. But since it ends in er, the rule changes for this one. And you may say cleverer and cleverest. You don't have to say more clever and most clever. Clever, cleverer, cleverest. Similarly with adjectives that end, which have more than two syllables, but which end in y. For example, pretty, pretty, prettier, prettiest, and ly, silly, sillier, silliest. The same rule holds good for adverbs too. When you use an adverb like uh, hard, he hit the metal hard. Hard, harder, hardest, the hardest. Late, later, latest. But when you have more than two syllables for the adverb, you use more and most, or less and least. So quietly becomes quietly, more quietly, most quietly. You don't say quietlier, quietliest. It is more quietly and most quietly. Slowly, more slowly, most slowly. In addition, there are certain adjectives and adverbs which take irregular forms of comparative and superlative degrees. For example, the adjective good, for example, you don't say gooder and goodest, you say good, better, and best. This is a good pen. My pen is better than yours when you're comparing two pens. And a superlative, this is the best pen I have ever used. So good takes the comparative form of better and the superlative form of best. Similarly, bad, you don't say badder and baddest, it is bad, worse, worst. It was a bad day for the sailors. It was worse than any day they had spent during that journey. It was the worst day of their lives. So, these are adjectives that take irregular forms: good, bad, little, much, and far. These are some examples of adjectives that take irregular forms. Similarly, with adverbs too. For example, badly. Badly, you say worse and worst. He treated the dog very badly, and he treated the dog worse than his neighbor. He treated his treatment of the dog was the worst. So that is how badly becomes worse and worst. Similarly with far, little, and well. So, to summarize what we have done so far in this unit, we are talking about the degrees of comparison, adjectives and adverbs, that is, the qualifying words used in a sentence may take different forms depending on the number of things or units or people that are being compared. When there is only one thing that is being spoken about, when there is only one noun, you use the positive degree of comparison. When you use to an adjective or an adverb to describe or compare two things or two people or two units or two objects, then you use the comparative form. And when you are speaking about more than two or many units of people, you use the superlative degree of comparison. Um, Most of the adjectives use and adverbs form the comparative and superlative degrees with the addition of the suffix er and est. But this is the case mainly with single syllabled adjectives and adverbs. Adjectives and adverbs that have more than two or more syllables normally take more and most or less and least to form the comparative and superlative degrees. They do not form comparative and superlative forms with the addition of er and est, as it happens in single syllabled nouns. Adjectives, single syllabled adjectives and adverbs. In addition, there are some adjectives and adverbs which take the irregular form. They do not take the er and est form. nor do they form the comparative and superlative with the addition of more and most or less and least. They change altogether. So, good has better as its comparative degree and best as the superlative degree. So, in the next section, we will be concentrating on some examples and exercises in order to uh, enable you to understand the degrees of comparison better.